Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise tonight to talk about climate change as well as the member for Johnston. It's the issue that won't go away despite the efforts of deniers, the ostriches among us in all levels of government who bury their heads in the sand, ignoring the fact that the sand is vastly hotter than it was last time they pretended climate change wasn't an issue. They declare themselves in the fight, trying to approach it through technology, not taxes. Snake oil is what I call such statements. This one's just another cute slogan, but one which is left open to the obvious accusation that it is misleading, unfunded lip service. We need to have that conversation with some courage and a conviction to strong 2030 and 2050 targets. However, what makes sense and what actually happens are often two very different things. The history of political responses to climate change in Australia since the 1990s reveals a bit of a non-party specific Jekyll and Hyde approach. A definite lack of consistency is evident. In 1997, governments insisted adapting emissions reduction targets would have a devastating impact on the economy, so they shied away from doing anything. However, in 2020, those opposites friends in the federal government decided to keep the targets set by a previous Labor government. Now the federal government appears to want to stick to low targets, while the rest of the world's modern economies are pressing forward with stricter, more definite reductions targets. The world is getting serious. Even the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom realise it. We need to show the same urgency in a bipartisan manner across all levels of government, and the federal government must show leadership. Climate change policy is a hot issue. But instead of wrestling towards unity on definitive action, the issue has become a hot potato. Australians feel cheated by this lack of direction on climate change, and rightly so. Let me talk about the situation now. The International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has just released its sixth assessment report, and I'll quote directly from the policymaker summary statement. It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere and biosphere have occurred. Unequivocal. The evidence cannot be refuted. And here's another quote. Evidence of observed changes in extremes such as heat waves, heavy precipitation, droughts and tropical cyclones, and in particular their attribution to human influence, has strengthened since the fifth assessment report. The evidence has strengthened, and the more research that is conducted, the stronger the case becomes. Global warming of 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees will be exceeded during the 21st century unless deep reductions in CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions occur in the coming decades. Temperatures will rise unless action is taken. The report also mentions specific climate events such as marine heat waves, ecological droughts, increasingly intense tropical cyclones, reduced permafrost, less effective carbon sinks, and notes irreversible historical changes. The IPP is an authoritative body comprised of 234 scientists who produce irrefutable scientific evidence of global warming based on over 14,000 examples of existing research. In Australia, we know it, we feel it. 1.4 degree higher average temperatures than last century, catastrophic bushfires and coral bleaching. Government assessments show a 23% fall in agricultural profits are attributable to climate change. An Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and Sciences report found farm profits could fall by up to 50% over the next 3 decades if global greenhouse gas emissions were not significantly reduced and producers did not adapt to the changing climate. Dr. Joelle Gergis of the Australian National University joins the chorus of scientists saying this latest report is a wake-up call for the world. She warns, if this report and the evidence from around the world right now does not convince this generation of political leaders that we have to stabilise the climate, then I don't think anything else will. This is as clear as we can be. Now it's up to our political leaders to act. The Federal Labor opposition spokesman for climate change, the Honourable Chris Bowen MP, states the IPCC report provides more evidence of government inaction in full agreement with the majority of Australians. And I echo the Honourable Federal Member's sentiment that Australians deserve better than the government spin. It's time to deliver, and he is indeed right when he notes that the world's climate emergency is Australia's job opportunity. But who has the most to lose from current inaction? Vulnerable Australians, First Nations Australians, our Pacific neighbours and our future generations of Australians. Whenever I talk to young people about what's troubling them most in a wider political context, most of them tell me that climate change is a major concern. They're troubled as they don't see the government taking the issue seriously. And a number of polls and research findings back up my personal experience. And I'll give you a few examples. A 2019 Lowy Institute report found that 6 in 10 Australians believe global warming is a serious and pressing problem about which we should begin taking steps now, even if this involves significant costs. A clear majority, 76% of young Australians aged 18 to 44, agree with this statement. In 2020, the Red Cross surveyed 1,477 Australians aged between 10 and 24 from all over the country, and found that 80% of them were either concerned or very concerned about climate change. One 19-year-old Australian offered this sage advice: listen to the Indigenous communities, listen to the scientists, take on their advice, be determined and driven to make each Australian live eco-friendly lives, work towards introducing new legislation and use renewable energy to reduce the effects of climate change. Lastly, in April of this year, the findings of a survey of 1,018 young Australians were published in a wide-ranging report on Generation Z by research organisation Millennial Future. 80% of 16 to 17-year-olds surveyed said that they did not believe that climate change is being exaggerated, and there is an overwhelming concern about the issue. The message is clear: climate change is real and young people care. We should therefore care as well if we don't already. We should care about climate change, but also about how worried our young people are about their future. So in light of the IPCC's 6th assessment report, what is to be done about climate change? And this is what the report says itself. From a physical science perspective, limiting human-induced global warming to a specific level requires limiting cumulative CO2 emissions, reaching at least net zero CO2 emissions, along with strong reductions in other greenhouse gas emissions. Strong, rapid and sustained reductions in methane emissions would also limit the warming effect resulting from declining aerosol pollution and would improve air quality. Allow me to go over this with a highlighter. What should we do about climate change? Limit human-induced global warming to specific levels. Aim for net zero CO2 emissions. Reduce greenhouse emissions and have strong, rapid and sustained methane reductions. Strong, rapid and sustained reductions. But it will take at least 20 years of consistent effort in these actions for us to see any discernible difference, and there's the rub. The unfortunate and disappointing trend in Australian politics over the past 15 years or so, since the monumental economic reforms of the Hawke-Keating governments, has been short-term policy making. The IPCC says we need to limit human-induced global warming to specific levels. I would suggest that all too often what we see is weak, slow and intermittent action on climate change based on a lack of belief fostering a lack of political will. Germany is a world leader in environmentally responsible economic management. They've actually locked in net zero carbon emissions for 2045. And when I say locked in, I'm not talking about pretty speeches drowning in rhetoric. They've made the target legally binding and it's been legislated. The court also noted in Germany that the previous laws which had targeted weak emissions violated the rights of young people. Remember them, the ones who bear the consequences of our choices, our children? So much energy has gone into the fight against COVID-19 as it should have done. But in the fullness of time, the horror of this global pandemic will be a memory. But the greater, more devastating prospect of disaster brought about by climate change will still be confronting us. And if we don't act now, it will be worse. If we ignore the mould on our walls or simply scrub away the surface stain, we aren't fixing the problem. At the moment, we're simply not doing enough. I call on all politicians from all levels to act swiftly and decisively so that we can lead Australia into a carbon emissions neutral future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.